In this episode of Sasquatch Theory, I sit down with Mark from Southeast Missouri to hear one of the most unsettling encounters ever shared on the channel, an experience that still affects him years later. What began as a routine deer season hunt in the Mark Twain National Forest turned into a moment that shattered everything Mark thought he knew about the woods, fear, and reality itself. Mark and a group of close friends had planned a classic deer drive, a method they'd used many times before. The idea was simple. A few men would push through thick cover, moving slowly and making noise, while the others waited in known travel corridors. It was familiar ground, land they had hunted for years, and nothing about the morning felt out of place. The forest was quiet in that late fall way, with brittle leaves underfoot and a damp chill hanging in the air. No one expected anything other than deer to move. As Mark pushed through dense honeysuckle, he suddenly became aware of heavy movement ahead of him. At first, he assumed it was a large buck breaking cover, but the sound was wrong. This wasn't the quick, nervous crashing of a deer. It was slow, deliberate, and powerful, like something large didn't care what stood in its way. Each step snapped branches and flattened brush as if the forest itself offered no resistance. When the creature stepped into view, Mark froze. Standing less than 40 yards away was something that should not exist. It was massive, well over 8 feet tall, with a chest mark estimated to be at least 4 feet wide. Its shoulders were broad and muscular, and its body was covered in dark, coarse hair that blended almost perfectly with the shadows of the woods. But it was the eyes that struck him hardest. Coal-black, deep-set eyes locked onto Mark with an intensity that felt intelligent, calculating, and deeply unsettling. The Sasquatch didn't roar or charge. It simply stood there, staring, as if assessing him. Mark described an overwhelming sense of dread washing over him, the kind of fear that bypasses logic and hits something primal. His rifle suddenly felt useless in his hands. He couldn't move, couldn't raise it, couldn't even think clearly. Time seemed to stretch and distort as they stared at each other in silence. Then, without warning, the creature turned and moved through the honeysuckle with shocking speed and strength. It didn't run like an animal fleeing danger. It moved like a bulldozer, snapping saplings, tearing through thick brush, and vanishing into the forest with ease. The sound of its passage echoed long after it was gone, leaving the woods unnaturally silent. Moments later, Mark heard frantic shouting from one of his friends positioned farther down the drive. When they regrouped, it became clear that Mark wasn't the only one who had seen it. His friend was pale, shaking, and struggling to speak. He described the same creature. Same size, same black eyes, same impossible power. There was no mistaking it. Whatever they had encountered was real, physical, and terrifyingly close. The drive was over. No one cared about deer anymore. They left the forest shaken and confused, trying to rationalize what had happened, but deep down, both men knew there was no normal explanation. The fear followed them home, but what happened next was even harder to explain. Within hours, Mark became violently ill. He experienced intense nausea, headaches, weakness, and a strange mental fog that lasted for days. Doctors couldn't give him a clear answer. His tests came back normal, yet he felt like his body had been poisoned. At the same time, his friend began suffering from severe anxiety, nightmares, and panic attacks. Eventually, he was diagnosed with PTSD, something neither man had ever dealt with before. Both Mark and his friend also noticed changes in their memories surrounding the encounter. Certain details felt blurred or missing, as if parts of the experience had been suppressed or altered. Conversations about the event were difficult. Sometimes memories would surface unexpectedly, accompanied by sudden fear or physical discomfort. Other times, it felt like trying to recall a dream that slipped away the harder they focused on it. Mark admits that before this experience, he was skeptical of Sasquatch encounters. He'd heard the stories, laughed at some of them, and dismissed others outright. But standing face to face with something that defied explanation changed him forever. The forest no longer felt like a place of comfort. Even today, stepping into deep woods brings back that same uneasy feeling, like being watched by something unseen. What makes this encounter especially disturbing is not just the size or appearance of the creature, but the lasting effects it had on the people who saw it. Physical illness, psychological trauma, memory disruption. These are patterns that appear again and again in Sasquatch encounters across North America, yet they're rarely discussed openly. Mark didn't come forward for attention or belief. He came forward because carrying the experience alone was becoming too heavy. Sharing his story, he hopes, might help others who've seen something similar and felt isolated because of it. Whether Sasquatch is a flesh and blood creature, something interdimensional, or something else entirely, Mark is certain of one thing: there are things in the forest that we do not understand, and sometimes, they see us before we ever see them. This encounter in the Mark Twain National Forest serves as a chilling reminder that the wilderness still holds secrets. And for those who have come face to face with those secrets, life is never quite the same again.